In October of 2025, a federal judge declared Dr. Phil's television empire dead, ordering everything the company owned to be sold off piece by piece. The company, he ruled, had never even pretended to try to save itself. In the judge's own words, there never has even been a pretense of a rehabilitation or reorganization. This is the man Forbes once crowned as the highest paid host on all of television, earning $88 million in a single year, roughly $241,000 every single day, by ordering millions of people to take responsibility for their failures. Yet, when his own empire started collapsing, Phil was sued for fraud by his own business partner, accused in court filings for creating a second company just one day before declaring bankruptcy, and found to have deleted text messages in the middle of the trial. Hi, I'm the Internet Anarchist. I create weekly YouTube documentaries, and today we're going to find out how daytime television's most trusted man engineered one of the most spectacular collapses in TV history, and why the scandals everyone remembers had almost nothing to do with it. Because the real story starts more than 50 years ago, long before anyone called him a doctor. This is the downfall of Dr. Phil. One of the biggest questions people often ask about Dr. Phil, especially those who only know him as the bald guy with a shiny head, or the guy who got told to catch me outside, is whether he's actually a real doctor. As it turns out, the answer is both yes and no. Growing up, Phil legitimately earned both his master's degree and his PhD in clinical psychology during the 1970s. So yes, at one point, he was officially recognized as a licensed psychologist, and he held that license for quite a while. The catch is that, first, his Texas license did not apply in California, where his television show was filmed. Second, in 2002, the California Board of Psychology determined that because Dr. Phil was an entertainment program rather than a psychology practice, he did not need a California license. As a result, he stopped renewing his Texas license in 2006. That sets the tone for a recurring pattern you'll notice throughout Phil's life. Time and time again, he comes across less like a genuine guy trying to uphold the traditional values he preaches, and more like a con artist who knows how to work the system. His relationship with his dad doing shady things reminds me a lot of Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can. Sure, he technically was a doctor at one point, but most people had no idea his license had expired. It all feels just a little slimy. That willingness to bend the rules goes much further back than his television career. In the early 1970s, Phil and his father, Joe, operated a business called the Gracian Health Spa in Topeka, Kansas. The spa was marketed as a premier wellness center, complete with gym equipment, saunas, pools, and massage tables. Phil signed hundreds of customers up for expensive lifetime membership contracts. Instead of holding onto those contracts, he sold them to 3 local Topeka banks for an immediate percentage of their total value. Then, in September 1973, less than 2 years after opening, Phil abruptly shut down the spa and moved to Wichita Falls, Texas. The biggest problem was that even though the spa no longer existed, the customers were still legally responsible for paying their memberships. Since the banks now owned the contracts, people had to keep making monthly payments for a business they couldn't go to. Between 1973 and 1974, 3 Topeka banks sued Phil for roughly $41,000, which would be about $350,000 today. The Kansas Attorney General's office also launched an investigation into the business. Lead investigator Emery Goad famously described it as a, quote, textbook example of a membership scam, and a, quote, total ripoff. He later explained, the 3 banks managed to have summons served on him in Texas, but Phil never put in a court appearance in Topeka for any of the 3 lawsuits, and did not pay back a penny. It was probably by design that he went back to Texas. At that time, Texas was one of only 2 states in the Union where you couldn't collect on out-of-state judgments. Phil never appeared in court, and after he left Kansas, the investigation eventually lost momentum. After earning his degree, Phil was hired in 1983 by a woman named Thelma Box to become a partner in her self-help organization called Pathways. It was essentially an emotional boot camp where Phil gave seminars to large groups of people. This became the testing ground for many of the ideas he would later build his television career around. He emphasized taking 100% responsibility for your actions and their consequences. The belief that, quote, people do what works, and the idea that intense pressure and tough love could trigger life-changing results. Keep in mind, the man teaching total responsibility to rooms full of strangers had just left 3 lawsuits and an attorney general investigation behind in Kansas without paying back a penny. And in 1992, Thelma Box found out exactly how much of that philosophy Phil applied to himself. Out of nowhere, a fax arrived from Phil and his father, informing her that they had sold their share of the company to a new ownership group for $325,000, roughly $800,000 in today's money. The problem was that Phil had actually sold his shares back in 1991, more than a year before telling her. By the time she found out, she had been left as the minority owner in a company now controlled by complete strangers. She was essentially backed into a corner and pressured into selling her own shares at a heavily discounted price. Once again, it's hard not to notice the trail of destruction Phil seemed to leave behind long before he got his big break. We talk about image a lot on this channel, about how people build one and how fast they lose it. And my own image costs about $9 a month. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription, so you pick a designer scent and they send you a month's supply. And then you swap it for something else the next month. Your first one is $8.97, and after that it's $17.95. This month I got 4. Sexual Paris Pour Homme by Michael Germain opens with champagne mandarin and sage, then settles into sandalwood and amber. That's the one I like to wear at night. Ocean Noir by Michael Malul is the opposite. All marine mist, Tangelo and black coconut, and it smells exactly like summer. Number 4 Deep Leather by True Western is smoky leather with salt and black amber. And Bake by Acro is lemon peel, praline, and vanilla, so it smells exactly like a cupcake. Full bottles of these can run you up hundreds of dollars. So this is the perfect way to live with one for a month before you commit to it. There are over 900 options to choose from Prada and Versace to niche brands like Parfums de Marly. One tip if you're new to this, don't spray your wrists and rub them together. Spray your chest before your shirt goes on and your body heat spreads it out all day. Using the QR code on screen or the link in the description, use code THEANARCHIST for 55% off your first month at Scentbird. That being said, let's get back into the video. It's safe to say that by the early 1990s, Phil already had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Not only had he been earning a steady income, but he had also pocketed 2 massive payouts that, adjusted for inflation, add up to well over $1 million in today's money. That's the thing with people like Phil though. The hustle never stops. It's almost like a shark that has to keep swimming or it'll die. Except instead of swimming, it's constantly looking for the next opportunity to squeeze every last dollar out of a situation. Fortunately for Phil, that opportunity was right around the corner. In 1990, he co-founded a company called Courtroom Sciences Inc., or CSI, a trial consulting firm that used psychology to help major corporations win lawsuits. Their job was essentially to coach witnesses, helping them come across as more believable and making sure they didn't completely fall apart on the witness stand. Phil's big break came in 1995 when Oprah Winfrey was sued by a group of Texas cattle ranchers over comments she made about mad cow disease. During an interview with activist Howard Lyman, Oprah famously said the discussion had stopped her, quote, cold from eating another burger.
It has just stopped me cold from eating another burger.
This was because, at the time, farmers were feeding cows back to other cows, giving them mad cow disease, which could be transmissible to humans that ate this infected beef. Beef prices and cattle futures dropped following the broadcast, prompting a group of rangers to sue her for $100 million under Texas's food disparagement laws. Somehow, Oprah's legal team came across Courtroom Sciences Inc. and hired the company to help her prepare for what became known as the Texas beef trial. According to Oprah herself, Phil was such an effective trial coach that she credits him as one of the major reasons she won the case. After the trial, she invited him to appear on her show. What followed was a meteoric rise to stardom powered by what many call the quote Oprah effect. In April 1998, Phil became a regular life strategist on a weekly segment of the Oprah Winfrey Show called Change Your Life TV. His blunt, tough love advice, combined with his southern charm and endless one-liners, was an instant hit with Oprah's audience of roughly 9 million viewers.
The things I said is that the difference between winners and losers is that winners do things losers don't want to do.
By September 2002, with the backing of Oprah's Harpo Studios, Phil launched his own syndicated daytime talk show, Dr. Phil. It quickly became one of the biggest shows on television, eventually growing into the second most watched talk show in the world, behind only Oprah's. Now, you may have made it this far into the video without actually knowing what Dr. Phil is about. You probably have a general idea though, and honestly, that general idea is probably pretty accurate. For all intents and purposes, Dr. Phil is basically a cleverly disguised version of the Jerry Springer Show.
I got a question for the drag queen in the black dress. Who told you you fit in that?
Hey, this is for the whale on the end. You said you have 5 kids, but have any of them popped out yet?
It doesn't present itself that way on the surface, but that's ultimately what it boils down to. The show marketed itself as the smarter, more emotionally intelligent alternative to daytime trash TV. Unlike other talk show hosts, Phil positioned himself as the reasonable one. He was the calm, level-headed psychologist who would break down people's problems, hold them accountable, and help them turn their lives around. The guests were still interesting, but the selling point was that he wasn't there to create drama. He was the good guy, the one genuinely trying to help, always preaching personal responsibility and self-improvement. The reality, though, was almost never that simple. More often than not, Dr. Phil was just an excuse to put the weirdest, loudest, and most unpredictable people imaginable on television because that was what people wanted to watch. His biggest episodes almost always featured guests who were completely out of control. They'd scream at him, storm off stage, start arguments, or would do something outrageous. Then Phil would step in, tell them to get out, or explain why their lives were falling apart.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You know, my dad used to tell me never pass up a good chance to shut up.
It's wish fulfillment in a way that Jerry Springer never really was, because Dr. Phil wrapped itself around the image of professionalism. Instead of a ringmaster, you had someone who presented as a real psychologist with a PhD offering expert advice. That gave the show an air of legitimacy, even though, at its core, it was still built around putting dysfunctional people on display for entertainment. And to be fair, there is something undeniably satisfying about watching Phil tear into people who are acting completely irrational. That's part of why the show worked for so long. With a premise like that, it's no surprise that the show found itself at the center of controversy after controversy during its 21-year run. In 2003, shortly after his show became a massive hit, Dr. Phil partnered with a Texas startup called CSA Nutraceuticals to launch the Shape Up with Dr. Phil supplement line. At the end of the day, they were basically just weight loss pills with his name slapped on the label to make some extra money. The supplements immediately raised eyebrows because Phil is a doctor of clinical psychology, not a medical doctor or a nutrition expert. To many people, his endorsement of the metabolic weight loss supplements came across as misleading. Sure enough, in 2004, the Federal Trade Commission launched an investigation into CSA over false advertising. The agency concluded there was no scientific evidence evidence that the pills actually helped people lose weight. Around the same time, 3 customers filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone who had purchased the supplements, alleging that the company made unproven claims and that customers had lost money, not weight. By the end of 2004, less than a year after hitting store shelves, CSA had stopped producing the supplements as legal pressure continued to mount, and in 2006, the case was settled for $10.5 million. The lawsuit was a significant blow to Dr. Phil's credibility, but he maintained that he wasn't personally responsible because he had no role in manufacturing the product. Instead, the settlement was paid by the company behind the product. If this were someone without a history of leaving questionable business dealings in their wake, I'd probably take that explanation at face value. I'd assume he simply licensed his name without doing enough research, and that it was an honest mistake. The problem is that Phil doesn't exactly have that kind of spotless reputation. In my opinion, it's far more likely that he knew the supplements were questionable and saw them as an easy way to make a lot of money. And whether they worked or not, that's exactly what happened. Money wasn't the only thing Phil seemed to handle recklessly over the years. Plenty of people who have crossed paths with his show have had their own issues with him, starting with a surprisingly strange one involving Britney Spears. For those of you who don't remember, Britney suffered a very public mental health crisis in 2008 that played out across nearly every major news outlet. During that time, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and according to reports, her parents reached out to Phil and invited him to visit her, hoping he might be able to help. Instead, almost immediately after leaving her hospital room, Dr. Phil released a public statement saying that Britney was in quote dire need of both medical and psychological intervention. Whether his intentions were good or not, many people saw it as a complete betrayal of the family's trust and a serious breach of privacy.
I want to set the record straight. I went to see Britney at the request of her family. I talked to Lynn, I talked to Jamie, I talked to Brian, her brother. They were very frustrated that she apparently wasn't going to be held for a longer period of time. Thursday night, the phone rang, and it was Lynn. And she has a very close relationship with my wife, Robin. And, clearly she was very upset, which you would expect. Any parent would be.
The backlash was immediate. Britney's family withdrew their support, and Dr. Phil ultimately scrapped plans for a television special centered around her. Which, it's honestly kind of unbelievable that it was even being considered in the first place. While Britney managed to avoid becoming a guest on the show, people like Todd Herzog weren't so fortunate. Todd won Survivor China and walked away with the show's $1 million grand prize. Unfortunately, after his victory, he developed a serious alcohol addiction and also struggled with substance abuse. By 2013, his family believed appearing on Dr. Phil might finally convince him to seek help, because apparently the best way to treat someone battling addiction is to put a camera in their face and have them sit under studio lights while millions of people watch. When Todd appeared on the show, he was severely intoxicated. He was so drunk that his family had to physically carry him onto the stage, and he later registered a .263 on a breathalyzer. Years after the episode aired, Todd accused the show's producers of intentionally contributing to his condition to make better television. According to him, there was a bottle of alcohol waiting in his dressing room, and he was even offered Xanax before going on stage.
I was completely sober, and then they pull me into my dressing room, and there was 2 liters of vodka and like some Red Bulls and orange juice and stuff like that. Being unsupervised by my parents, I drank the entire bottle. And then at some point, somebody gave me a Xanax. They said, this will calm your nerves.
There are a couple of problems with that claim. First, Todd could simply be lying, which was essentially Dr. Phil's response to the allegations. Second, even if parts of Todd's account are true, that doesn't necessarily mean Dr. Phil himself was orchestrating some elaborate plan to get him as intoxicated as possible. Todd also left out the fact that dressing rooms for television guests are often stocked with refreshments, including alcohol as a part of standard hospitality. It's entirely possible that the bottle wasn't wasn't placed there specifically for him. It may have simply been routine. The same goes for the staff. A production like Dr. Phil employs dozens of people, and not every staff member is going to know every detail about every guest. It's entirely possible that someone stalked the room without realizing the next person walking through the door would be Todd Herzog, a recovering alcoholic. Whether that's enough to excuse what happened is another question entirely, but Todd's version of events does leave room for reasonable doubt. While Todd Herzog's story has a few holes in it, Turnabout Ranch was an absolute nightmare by comparison. For those of you who don't know, Turnabout Ranch is a for-profit residential treatment program for so-called troubled teenagers. It was also one of the facilities Dr. Phil regularly recommended to parents whose kids were acting out. In fact, it's the same ranch he sent Danielle Bregoli to, better known as the Catch Me Outside girl after she appeared on his show. Unfortunately, over the years, several former residents have come forwards with horrifying stories about their time there. The ranch itself has been the subject of numerous lawsuits involving allegations of abuse, sexual assault, and even a homicide. In 2016, while Danielle was staying at the ranch, a 15-year-old participant named Clay Brewer attacked 2 staff members with a blunt object. One staff member, Jimmy Woolsey, was killed, while another, Alicia Keller, suffered devastating injuries and died 2 years afterwards. Then, in 2022, former resident and person on the show, Hannah Archuleta, filed a lawsuit alleging that she had been sexually assaulted by a male staff member, and then punished by the ranch after reporting the abuse. The lawsuit also claimed that Dr. Phil and his producers pressured her parents to send her to Turnabout Ranch, despite allegedly knowing about the facility's troubled history, including the fatal 2016 attack. Ultimately, the judge dismissed the lawsuit, ruling that there were not sufficient legal grounds for it to proceed. After the case was dismissed, Dr. Phil's production company asked the court to require Hannah to cover their legal expenses. The court ultimately ordered her to pay roughly $400,000, including about $360,000 in attorney fees and another $42,000 in legal costs. When confronted about the allegations surrounding Turnabout Ranch, Dr. Phil distanced himself from the facility, saying,
"We don't have anything to do with what happens with guests once they leave the stage. I mean, that's between the guardian and the parent and whatever facility they go to."
Now, to play devil's advocate for a moment, Turnabout Ranch wasn't the only treatment center Phil had recommended over the years. There were plenty of other programs he sent teenagers to that, as far as we know, never generated anything even close to this level of controversy. It's entirely possible that he had no idea how serious the allegations would eventually become. In 2023, the original Dr. Phil show concluded its 21-year run on CBS. While Phil publicly stated he was resigning due to, quote, woke censorship, data suggests the show was also suffering from a sharp decline in relevance. Ratings had plummeted from a peak of nearly 7 million viewers in 2007 to roughly 1.4 million by late 2021. In August 2022, ahead of the final season, the production laid off 25 staffers as a cost-cutting measure. By 2024, Dr. Phil was ready for his next big business venture. In April of that year, he partnered with the Trinity Broadcasting Network, better known as TBN, to launch his own television network called Merritt Street Media. Under the agreement, TBN agreed to finance almost the entire production. That included building a studio in Texas, covering production costs, and even providing Dr. Phil with access to a private jet as part of a reported 10-year deal worth roughly $500 million. However, it didn't take long for the partnership to completely fall apart. Almost immediately, both sides began accusing each other of lying and breaking their promises. One of the biggest disputes centered around the original Dr. Phil library. According to TBN, Dr. Phil led them to believe that they would have free access to all 21 years of his old episodes. The problem was that those rights were actually owned by CBS. TBN later alleged that after the deal was signed, Phil demanded another $100 million if they wanted to access the archive.
Networks are ruthless about ownership and control of the syndication rights. They're not going to just give that to the guy in front of the camera. Now, I don't know the exact terms of the deal between Dr. Phil and CBS when they were broadcasting his show, but we can safely assume he was in no position to offer TBN the broadcast rights to the back library of a hit CBS show, let alone at, quote, no additional cost. In fact, there's only one host in the history of talk shows who's ever gotten meaningful ownership and control of the back library and syndication rights, and she got them at a time when network executives thought that daytime TV wasn't worth much.
TBN also claimed that Dr. Phil failed to deliver the roughly 160 new episodes he had promised, and did very little to secure advertising revenue for the network. In the middle of 2024, Dr. Phil reportedly convinced TBN to increase his ownership stake in Merit Street Media from 30% to 70%. According to court filings, he argued that he needed majority control to attract major outside investors, mentioning names like Dirk Nowitzki and billionaire Harlan Crow. TBN claims that once Dr. Phil secured majority control, he immediately removed the company's TBN-appointed board members. In an email to his publicist, he allegedly referred to the move as a, quote, gangster move. Court filings also allege that he later instructed the company to stop paying several of its major financial obligations, including a reported $181 million debt owed to the professional bull riders. By July 2025, Merit Street Media filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, accusing TBN of sabotaging the network and making it impossible to continue operating. But the bankruptcy proceedings uncovered something else that drew even more attention. According to court records, just one day before filing for bankruptcy, Dr. Phil had created a second company called Envoy Media. Internal communications presented in court suggested that the plan was to use the Chapter 11 process to eliminate Merit Street's debts, then transfer employees, programming, and other business operations over to the new company, allowing the business to continue without the financial baggage. Federal Judge Scott Everett became furious after learning that Dr. Phil had intentionally deleted text messages that were considered relevant to the case, stating Mr. McGraw believed he was calling the shots. In October 2025, the court put an end to the Chapter 11 reorganization and converted the case into a Chapter 7 liquidation. In other words, Merit Street Media was effectively declared dead. A court-appointed trustee took control of the company and began selling off its remaining assets, including production equipment and media property, in an effort to repay creditors. Dr. Phil himself walked away with his personal fortune largely intact, but the media empire he had spent years trying to build collapsed in spectacular fashion. It's fascinating to see that even at the old age of 75 years old, Dr. Phil is still trying to hatch schemes and do shady deals with money like he did in his 20s. As of writing this script, Dr. Phil is estimated to be worth around $400 million, so he will very likely be fine even after fumbling this latest lawsuit. Usually I like to end these videos with an uplifting lesson that ties everything together into a nice bow, but to be honest, I don't even know what to say about this one. Perhaps, if you work hard enough, you can scam your way to the top. None of these really work, so I'm just gonna end this one off with, Phil may be a multi-millionaire, but he's still not safe from the Norwood Reaper. Again, don't forget to use code THEANARCHIST for 55% off your first month at Scentbird.